Some towns disappear quietly from the map. Others linger, rotting behind their curtains, whispering through boarded windows. But Black Hollow never left. It just learned to hide in plain sight. Let me ask you something. How long does a town have to go unnoticed before the world forgets it ever existed? 5 years? 50? 100? Black Hollow has no welcome sign anymore. No lights flickering in windows. No gas station. Not even a single paved road. On most maps, it's a smudge of unnamed forest just south of the old Appalachian railroad line, where the trees lean a little too close and the fog never quite lifts. But the ground there remembers, and the names, well, some names claw their way back. It was October 19th, 2023, when Maeve Delaney first typed Black Hollow into the State Archive terminal in Charleston. She wasn't a historian, at least, not officially. She was a true crime podcaster, one of those late-blooming millennials who'd made a name digging into obscure American tragedies no one else remembered. Her voice, soft, calm, haunting, had earned her a loyal audience. But what she found that day wasn't meant for an audience. She was supposed to be researching the 1927 disaster at Cold Springs Quarry, an explosion that killed 14 men. But the digital records redirected her query with a simple system note. See also, Black Hollow Mass Disappearances, 1918 to 1934. Mass disappearances. Maeve had covered disappearances before. Cults, wartime evacuations, even undocumented government relocations. But what she unearthed here chilled her to the bone. According to state coroner records, 33 men from the same township died or vanished between 1918 and 1934. All married, all under the age of 50, all residents of a hamlet called Black Hollow, registered in Logan County, a place that hadn't issued a census form since 1950. But the strangest detail? Not a single widow ever left. 33 women, no remarriages, no children, no land transfers. They just stayed, for decades, until the town faded from public record. Maeve printed everything she could find: grainy death certificates, court summaries, faded ledger entries from an old general store. In one file, a judge's scribbled note caught her attention. Claimants: obstinate, declined relocation assistance, uncooperative, spoke of oath-binding, not law. One used the term blood covenant. Recommend further psychiatric evaluation. What in God's name happened there? By mid-November, Maeve was already calling local libraries, trying to reach anyone in Logan County who remembered Black Hollow. Most did in single quotes. One man, Thomas Grigsby, 92, a retired postmaster, said something strange. Black Hollow. You mean the town that ate its own? On November 28th, Maeve drove the 5 hours from Charleston to Logan County with her field recorder, a notepad, and a bottle of ginger tea. It was raining when she arrived, the kind of steady Appalachian drizzle that feels like it's being whispered rather than dropped. She met Grigsby in a diner off Route 10. He was sharp despite the tremor in his hands. When she played coy about Black Hollow, he gave her a tired smile. I was 9 when my uncle went missing there. Officially, he died in a hunting accident. But everyone knew he was warned off, told to stay out of Hollow Ridge. He paused, stirring his coffee. But Uncle Daniel, he was curious. Thought he could make money off old timber rights. Didn't even make it past the tree line. Maeve leaned in. You called it the town that ate its own. What did you mean? Grigsby looked her dead in the eye. They fed it, Miss Delaney, for years. Men went missing, and the women, they stayed. Never cried, never talked, just kept their homes clean and their churches locked, like they were waiting. And then one day, they were just gone. The next morning, Maeve followed the path carved into her GPS by old survey maps, a route that no longer officially existed. Her Subaru crawled over cracked gravel and sinking clay roads until even the signal bars on her phone vanished. The Forest seemed to bend toward the vehicle, narrowing, as if inhaling her. By noon, the trees thinned just enough to reveal what little remained of Black Hollow. Time had not just passed here, it had consumed. Houses slumped into the mud like kneeling corpses. A brick schoolhouse was cracked down the middle, ivy strangling its bell tower. A rusted street sign read Marrow Street, Maeve parked by the church. It was the only structure mostly intact. Red brick, modest steeple, no cross. The door was bolted shut with iron chains, too recent to be original. The lock gleamed under the grime. Strange, she thought. Who's maintaining this? Inside the car, Maeve dictated her thoughts aloud. Day 1 at Black Hollow. No visible human activity, but some structures still partially standing. Chains on the church doors suggest modern intervention, possibly local preservation efforts, or containment. She paused. So far, no wildlife. No birds, no squirrels, not even flies. It's dead quiet. Before stepping out, she checked her bag, flashlight, camera, mic, water, notebook, pepper spray. The last was a habit from her Chicago days, back when she was still covering city murders. The moment her boots touched the earth, something changed. Not sound. Silence had been there all along. It was weight. The air thickened, like it disapproved. She didn't feel watched. That would have been manageable. No, Maeve felt. Remembered? The graveyard behind the church was half swallowed by undergrowth, but the headstones told a story. A tragic, meticulous story. Each one bore the same last names. Whitlow, Crowder, Bellamy, Ashlock, and each husband's death was paired with a wife's name chiseled below. No date. Just the word WIDOW, in deliberate, sharp letters. The last marker read, Ezra L. Galloway, 1888 to 1928 husband, father, oathkeeper. Beside him, Ada Galloway, WIDO, WAVA, whispered to herself. What oath? That's when she noticed the small totems. Behind each headstone, half buried in soil or tucked into roots, were wooden figures, primitive carvings of kneeling women. No faces, all painted black. Some had rotted, but 33 remained. Maeve turned to the microphone, voice slightly shaking. I don't think this was a cult. It feels older than that. Ritualistic, but not performative. It's as if these people were bound to something, not just belief, bound by consequence. She knelt to photograph the carvings, but before she could click, a sudden gust knocked her backward. Dust filled her eyes. The sound followed a low hum, not mechanical, not animal. It vibrated through the ground, as if something deep beneath had stirred. Maeve scrambled to her feet, breathing heavy. Her recorder had stopped. The red light was blinking. Out of instinct, she checked her watch. 3:33 p.m. Exactly that night, she drove out of the forest, promising herself she'd return with backup. Maybe even a local historian. But as the town disappeared in her rearview mirror, she couldn't shake the sensation. Not fear, not even curiosity. Something worse. Recognition. As if, in that dying town, something ancient had looked up and seen her, and known she would come back. They say the land never forgets, but in Black Hollow, it doesn't just remember, it resents. Maeve Delaney didn't sleep that night. She returned to her motel in Chapmanville, a 20-minute drive, but it felt like she had crossed centuries. Her notes were disorganized. The audio from her recorder had corrupted the moment the hum started, and that name, Ezra Galloway, kept circling in her head like a vulture. She tried editing the footage, tried cleaning the static from the recording, but it was all useless. A garbled hum, followed by digital silence. Not even background noise. She whispered into her mic, voice hollow. Field note. November 29th, 11:58 p.m. All data recorded after 3:33 p.m. is unusable. Equipment failure coincided with physical event. Unexplained wind burst and subterranean vibration. Carvings beside graves undisturbed. Church remains chained. We'll consult local archives and return to the site tomorrow, with backup batteries, an analog tape recorder as redundancy. But she didn't hit stop. She just sat there, listening to the faint hiss of the static. Then she spoke again. Why? Were there 33 widows? Exactly. Why didn't they leave? What were they waiting for? She stared at her laptop. The map, the layout, the pattern. Was it a pact? The following morning, Maeve drove to the Logan County Courthouse. The building itself was a relic aging sandstone with weather-worn Corinthian columns, sitting like an artifact among fast food joints and dollar stores. Inside, a retired archivist named Diane Mercer had agreed to meet her. Diane was polite, grandmotherly, and had once been the keeper of Logan's land records. When Maeve mentioned Black Hollow, Diane didn't blink. She sighed. You're not the first to go poking around those woods. But the last girl that tried never came back. Maeve stiffened. Excuse me. Diane leaned in, lowering her voice 3 years ago. Grad student from Penn State, said she was writing a dissertation on Appalachian isolationism. Spent weeks in town, taking photos, writing letters to some historical journal. Then one day, she packed up and left to get closer to the hollow. No one's heard from her since. Her car was found parked outside the tree line 2 months later, battery dead, empty. Maeve took a long breath, scribbling her name. Grad student. 2020. Missing person report. But Diane wasn't finished. There's more. The widow's homes. They were never resold. The county tried, sent surveyors, but something always went wrong. One man slipped into the creek bed and shattered his spine. Another was bitten by something. No one ever figured out what. The records show them all as non-viable assets, abandoned, like the land refused to be owned again. Maeve stared at her. Do you have those property records? Diane nodded and led her into a humidity-locked back room. The files were brittle, ink faded. Maeve sifted through deeds and tax ledgers. And then she saw it. The 1934 probate ledger from Logan County. An entire column was struck out in red. 33 female claimants, property held in perpetual domestic trust, transfer, blocked by State Order 7-62B. Maeve blinked. The state blocked the sale. Why? Diane hesitated. That wasn't a state order. She pointed to a seal in the corner of the document. Not the state crest. Something else. A symbol burned into the corner. It looked like an I split down the middle with a crossed key inside the pupil. Almost a brand. Maeve photographed it. Her hand was trembling. That afternoon, she returned to Black Hollow. This time, she parked farther back, walked in slowly, taking the overgrown trail on foot. The fog was thicker today, the forest darker, yet the silence remained, that deep, suffocating quiet, where even thoughts felt intrusive. When she reached the church again, she noticed the chains had moved, not removed, just slackened. Someone or something had touched them. She crouched low, voice barely a whisper into the analog recorder. Entry 2. November 30th. Chains on church door altered. No vehicle tracks, no signs of tampering. But the padlock is warmer than ambient air temperature. Could be residual heat. Or, she didn't finish the sentence. Instead, Maeve stepped around. The back. The church's rear windows were boarded from the inside. But just above the cellar, a small soot-streaked window was cracked open. She hesitated only once. Then she slipped inside. The church interior was dry, dusty, but not abandoned there. Were footprints, fresh ones, in the dust. Narrow, feminine. They led down the aisle between the pews, toward the altar. Maeve followed slowly, her breath hitching. The altar was bare, no cross, no Bible, just a wooden table with 33 shallow depressions, like candle holders, but shaped to cradle something smaller, personal. The carvings, she whispered again. This wasn't a church. It was a temple, or a meeting place. The architecture is Christian, but the ritual markings, they're not. And then she saw it, scratched into the pulpit with a dull knife, barely legible, beneath layers of time. In her sorrow, she feeds. In our vows, she waits. Maeve stepped back. The floor groaned beneath her, but not just from weight. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic thump beneath the floorboards, like a heartbeat. She didn't wait. She backed toward the door, recorder still running. There's something alive here, or not alive, but present. Then her foot struck something, a small wooden carving, like the ones in the graveyard. But this one had a face, Maeve's face, carved crudely, but unmistakably. The hair, the brow, the slope of her jaw, it hadn't been there before. She ran, out the rear door, through brambles, back to the car, but, even as the engine roared to life, Maeve felt a truth settle in her spine like frost. She had been counted. Later that night, she tried contacting Diane again. No answer. Maeve left a message. Then she called the Logan County Sheriff's Office, spoke briefly with a deputy named Farrell, asked about the missing grad student. Silence on the line. Then, Black Hollow's not under our jurisdiction, ma'am. It's old land. Church-owned. Technically unincorporated. Which church? That's the thing, Farrell replied, voice cracking. No one knows. The records are sealed under something called Covenant Trust Holdings. Private ecclesiastical estate. No current owner listed. Maeve sat motionless. Then Farrell added, "You were up there, weren't you? I'd be careful. Lot of folks go poking into things that should have stayed buried. They don't come back the same." Back in her motel room, Maeve locked the door, drew the blinds. When she opened her bag to pull out the notebook, she found something she hadn't packed. A small envelope, no return address. Inside was a photograph, dated May 12, 1934. Black and white, faded. It showed the 33 widows, all dressed in black, standing shoulder to shoulder outside the church. They were staring straight at the camera, not smiling, not solemn, just watching, and standing, at the center, was Ada Galloway. In her hands, she held a carving. Maeve squinted. The detail was clear. It was a cradle, empty. It begins as a whisper, just beyond hearing. But if you listen too long, Black Hollow starts to speak in you, not to you. Maeve didn't sleep. Again, the motel room was sealed tight, the door locked, the blinds drawn, yet she kept checking the corners. Her camera bag sat untouched on the desk, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. She'd already seen the photo, the faces of the 33 widows, lined like statues, eyes steady, waiting, and her own name, written in faint pencil on the back of the photograph. Maeve, a Delaney, observer receptive, marked. She didn't recognize the handwriting. What haunted her most wasn't the threat, it was the calmness of it, as if this had all been foreseen, as if she were supposed to come. At 3:33 a.m., Maeve sat at the edge of the bed, whispering into the recorder. Entry 3, December 1st, photo found in my personal belongings, without explanation, includes 33 widows and carving of cradle. My name appears handwritten on back, with reference to being marked. Feeling of dread persists. Constant sensation of anticipation. She paused. I don't think the town is haunted. I think it's awake. That morning Maeve drove not toward Black Hollow, but away from it. She headed north to Hart's Creek, a nearby town where some of the descendants of Logan County's original families still lived. She was searching for proof, not just legend. She found a tiny local museum, no more than a room behind a hardware store, curated by an elderly woman named Caroline Wyatt. Caroline had been born in 1943, long after the widows vanished, but she remembered the tales. We were never allowed to say their names growing up, she said, thumbing through a yellowed scrapbook. My grandmother told me they made a pact to keep something buried, or someone. Maeve leaned in. Do you know Ada Galloway? Caroline nodded. She was the last one the last widow. I remember hearing stories of her walking the chapel path, in silence, always alone, always in black. Maeve pulled out the photo. Caroline paled. That's it, she whispered. That's the last known photo of them. But I've only ever seen a version with 32 widows. Maeve's breath caught. This one has 33. They both counted. 30-3. Caroline looked closer, finger trembling. This one in the back. She doesn't belong. I don't recognize her face. Maeve leaned over the image. The woman in the back row, second from the left. Her face was slightly turned, hair loose, hands folded differently than the rest. Then she noticed something else. The woman was barefoot. This one wasn't part of them, Caroline said. She was added. Maeve stared. Skin prickling. It was the same build, same shape, the same hairline. It was her back in her motel. Maeve stared at her laptop screen, pulling up local genealogical archives and connecting names from the gravestones with county birth records. The deeper she searched, the stranger it became. Of the 33 widows, only 7 had recorded births in the state of West Virginia. The rest, no birth records, no maiden names, no documents prior to their marriages. It was as if they'd simply appeared, fully formed. Bound to Black Hollow, she jotted the names down. One stood out. Thessaly Bellamy. According to one entry in an obscure 1925 church ledger, Thessaly had petitioned for spiritual exemption from postmarital duties due to sanctified expectancy. The note was countersigned by Reverend Absalom Rook, a man with no other public records. Maeve circled the name. Rook. He's the connection, she whispered. Whoever he was, he bound them, and then the motel room buzzed. Not her phone, not the heater, the floor itself. A faint vibration, a ripple through the carpet. She checked her watch. 3:33 p.m. that night. Maeve drove back to Black Hollow. She didn't tell anyone. No phone calls, no recordings, no announcements on her podcast's community page. She needed to see it alone, one last time, before deciding whether this story should ever be told. This time, the fog had thickened, rolling low like a tide. Her flashlight barely cut 10 feet ahead, but the path was familiar now. It welcomed her. The church stood still, unchanged, but the door was open. She stepped inside, every hair on her body standing. The air was warmer, tighter, like walking into lungs that had just inhaled. Inside, the pews had been rearranged, not just randomly, symmetrically, all turned to face the center aisle. And in that aisle stood a woman, dressed in black, thin, barefoot, her face hidden by a veil. Maeve froze. The woman turned slowly, deliberately. Her face was hollow, not in a supernatural sense, not skull-like or gory, just wrong, like something had worn a human face for too long, and now it no longer fit. Then the woman whispered, not with her mouth, but from the walls themselves, "You are counted." Maeve backed away, breath rapid. The woman stepped forward. Her feet didn't make a sound. She waits. You saw the cradle. You heard her breath. You are the final. Then, the woman tilted her head and smiled. The pews creaked. Maeve turned and ran. Pushing through the door, across the graveyard, behind her, she heard no footsteps. Only weeping, low, collective, rhythmic weeping, 33 voices, all in unison. Maeve didn't remember driving back. Only the road, bending endlessly. Only the whisper that repeated every time she blinked. You are the final. When she finally returned to her motel, something waited on the bed. Not a carving this time. A piece of cloth. Black, thin, a veil, and a note, folded on top of it. Sunday, 3:33 p.m. The vow will be kept. Maeve dropped it, shaking. She recorded one final entry. This is Maeve Delaney. If you're hearing this, I need you to listen carefully. Something is happening in Black Hollow. Not a ghost story, not a cult. Something older. Something that feeds on ritual, on repetition, on memory. I've been marked. The number 33, it's not symbolic, it's instructional. It's a seal, a cycle. She paused. I don't know what happens when they reach the final number, but I think they've been waiting for decades, and I think I might be the vessel. Her voice dropped to a whisper. If I go back on Sunday, I may not come back, but I have to know what they're feeding. I have to know what she is. On her laptop, she uploaded her audio files to a cloud archive, encrypting the folder. Then she opened a draft post titled, "The Town That Ate Its Own Final Entry." She didn't write anything else, just stared at the blinking cursor, waiting for Sunday, waiting for 3:33. Some doors aren't opened with keys. They open with memory, with ritual, with the willingness to be seen. The sun rose late on Sunday, pale and indifferent. Maeve stood at the edge of her motel sink, staring at her reflection. She hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours. Her skin looked brittle, her eyes slightly sunken. The black veil lay folded on the bed behind her, untouched since last night, but its presence was unbearable. She was being summoned, and somewhere, 32. Women were already waiting. She reviewed her recordings again, the corrupted audio from her first encounter, the second-hand accounts, the strange gaps in the public records. But it wasn't the missing pieces that haunted her. It was how deliberate the erasure had been. This wasn't time or neglect. This was design. The widows hadn't just buried their husbands, they'd buried something else. And now the seal was thinning. Maeve didn't pack her laptop, didn't bring backup batteries. She left everything except her analog recorder and a printed copy of the 1934 photo. That, and the veil. She left her motel door unlocked. She didn't expect to return. The drive to Black Hollow was silent. The forest had changed again. The trees leaned heavier. The branches seemed sharper, more bone than bark. And the fog was thicker than it had ever been. It didn't drift or roll anymore. It clung. The Subaru coughed at the last bend in the trail, and Maeve had to walk the rest of the way in. Her boots sank into soft soil that pulsed faintly with each step. It was 3:12 p.m. at 3:17. She reached the church, and the doors were wide open. Inside, the pews had been cleared entirely. In their place were 33 empty chairs, arranged in a perfect circle. No dust now, no cobwebs. The room was immaculate, as if recently cleaned, and waiting at the center, the cradle, real this time, not carved. Old wooden, handmade. Maeve stepped inside. Her breath caught. The air inside the church was heavy, like velvet soaked in brine. She pulled the recorder from her coat pocket and whispered, December 3rd, 3:28 p.m., Black Hollow Church. 33 chairs, in a perfect ring. The cradle from the photograph is here. Same design, same notch on the corner. It's real. This isn't a reenactment. This is continuation. She looked around. No one else was visible, but she could feel them. Then she noticed something. On each chair, draped carefully, was a piece of black fabric. Veils, 32 of them. The 33rd. Hers was still folded in her bag. With trembling hands, she took it out, held it, then placed it over her head, and stepped into the circle. 3:33 p.m., a sound began, soft, like a violin string plucked beneath water, then movement. From the church's side door, the widows began to enter, one by one, silent, ageless. Each wore a black veil, barefoot. Their steps were identical, synchronized as if rehearsed endlessly. They took their seats in the circle, and never looked at Maeve. They looked at the cradle, all 30-2. Maeve stood alone in the center, the veil still over her eyes. Then she heard the voice again, not loud, not whispered, but present in the floorboards, the walls, her chest. She has come. The vow may be fulfilled. Maeve turned slowly. A 33rd widow now entered through the rear doors. But she didn't walk. She floated, feet grazing the ground, eyes hidden by a veil so long it dragged behind her like a train. In her arms, she carried something wrapped in black cloth. She glided past the chairs and gently laid the bundle in the cradle, then turned to Maeve. "Do you accept the burden?" Maeve didn't speak. COULDN, single quotes. The room held its breath. "Do you accept the silence that feeds? Do you accept that you are the final, the seal, the mouth, the memory?" Maeve opened her mouth, not to answer, but to scream. Nothing came out. The veiled widow stepped back into her chair, and the others began to hum low, resonant, a sound that shook the bones without passing through the ears. The cradle began to move, slowly, gently, rocking. The cloth stirred. Maeve stepped forward. Her legs didn't feel like her own. Her fingers trembled as she reached out and pulled back the veil of the cradle. Inside was not a baby. Not exactly it was. A shape, writhing, shadowed. Limbs that didn't belong to any species known. Flesh that pulsed and blinked with embedded eyes. And then it looked at her. All of it. Every part of it. And she understood. This was what they had. Fed. For generations, the widows began to chant. A language not Latin, not human, but remembered by blood. Maeve staggered backward, tried to run, but the church was sealed, not with locks, with intention. The floor vibrated, the cradle trembled. The shape inside grew louder, not in sound, but in awareness. It unfolded within her, filled the spaces between her ribs. She collapsed. Her recorder slid from her fingers. It captured only this. She's not feeding on souls. She's feeding on remembrance. The widows didn't sacrifice their husbands. They sacrificed themselves. And I am the last memory, the final echo, the seal that will close or open. And then the recording ended. That evening, a hiker spotted Maeve's abandoned car. The local sheriff's office dispatched two deputies to investigate. They never reached the town. Their radio reported heavy fog and the equipment failure at 3:33 p.m. Then, silence. 3 days later, a state investigator located Maeve's recorder, found halfway down a ravine near the hollow's edge. Its casing was cracked, but the tape was intact. He filed it under unresolved incident, ecclesiastical terrain conflict. The file was later moved to a private archive, sealed with a familiar insignia, the eye, split down the middle, with a key inside the pupil. The cradle was never empty. It simply waited for the one who remembered how to rock it. Before Maeve Delaney, before the church was sealed, before 33 men vanished into soil and silence, there was only her, the first widow. Her name was Thessaly Bellamy, and in the winter of 1917, she became the first woman in Black Hollow to dig a grave before her husband had died. Black Hollow in 1917 was a different kind of forgotten, one that wore civility like a mask. The streets were orderly. The chapel chimes still rang on Sundays. Children learned hymns before they learned how to write, but something had shifted that year. The Hollow had grown quiet, not in the usual way rural towns decline, but in a way that felt intentional, like a house holding its breath while something sharp passes by the window. Thessaly felt it first in her bones, a numbness that crept in whenever she stood in the garden. Her husband, Emery, a woodworker with strong hands and a gentle voice, began waking in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, whispering things he couldn't remember the next morning. And then there were the sounds, faint at first, like a distant lullaby, coming from beneath the church. December 12, 1917, Thessaly was in the chapel's basement, restocking the oil for lanterns. When she first noticed the cracks in the stone floor, they weren't from age or erosion. They were carved, a symbol, a closed eye, crosscut with a key, just like the one Maeve would one day find. But Thessaly had never seen it before. She asked Reverend Absalom Rook the next morning, a man with strange silences and 2 soft hands for a preacher. His response was immediate. Don't touch it. But it's not natural, Thessaly said. Neither is the thing that sleeps beneath it. Over the next weeks, Emery changed. He stopped speaking, stopped carving. He would sit in the rocking chair by the window and stare at the chapel tower. Sometimes he would mouth something, silently, as if reciting words not meant to be heard. Thessaly asked the doctor. He said it was stress, war nerves, malaria, but she knew better, because sometimes, when she stood behind Emery at night, she could see his shadow move differently than his body, and once, when she touched his shoulder, he whispered, in a voice that was not his own, "She's hungry." January 3, 1918. Reverend Rook summoned the women of Black Hollow. Only the women. No announcements were made, no invitations sent, but they came, one by one. Widows, wives, daughters, 30-3 in total, including Thessaly. They stood in the basement of the chapel, barefoot, candles in hand, and Reverend Rook told them the truth. He spoke of a thing buried beneath the hollow, long before the town was settled. A creature of no fixed form, bound by ritual and silence. A memory eater, born from the grief of a forgotten mother who had buried all her children. The land, he said, had once been part of a sanctified circle, a spiritual wound bandaged by a vow kept by women who understood sacrifice as language, but the binding was weakening, because the land no longer remembered. Too many outsiders had come. Too many men had claimed it, renamed it, shaped it with hands that forgot the soil's mourning. Now the hunger had returned, and it required 33 vessels, not offerings of flesh, offerings of remembrance. The women had a choice, Reverend Rook said. They could flee and let the hollow consume everything, let the hunger spread beyond the forest, into towns and cities, or they could become its keepers, its wives, its widows, to tether it again. They would each surrender a part of themselves, not their bodies, but their lineage, their names, their histories. They would bear the silence. And if they succeeded, the hunger would sleep again, until the day came when the seal cracked once more, and a final widow would return to finish the circle. Thessaly didn't speak during the ceremony. None of them did. They stood in the circle, candles flickering, and repeated the vow. 30-3 voices, bound by one word. With sorrow, we feed. With silence, we bind. That night, Emery did not scream. He simply evaporated, clothes left in the chair, with shavings by his boots, and Thessaly. She dug his grave anyway. In the years that followed, the widows changed. They aged slower, spoke less, worked the soil with unnatural efficiency, never left. They formed a council, met beneath the chapel once every 33 nights, and whispered to the cradle in the dark. The creature beneath the hollowing, they called it, remained dormant. But it dreamed, and in its dreaming, it remembered them, remembered their hands, their songs. It was not evil, Thessaly would write once, in a letter never mailed. It simply needs to be remembered, or it unravels. She knew what it felt like, because she, too, had become unremembered. Then, in 1934, the seal began to fray. A man, Ezra Galloway, tried to leave, tried to speak. He wrote a letter to the Charleston paper, detailing strange events in the hollow, calling it a deliberate communal hallucination. He was found dead the next morning, face buried in soil, eyes filled with dirt. The letter never arrived. The postmaster was one of the widow's sons. It was the last known breach. After that, the widows enacted the final silence, abandoning the chapel, sealing the doors, and vanishing from public record. But the cradle remained, and the count stayed at 30-2, until now. Back in the present day, Maeve sat motionless in the forest, not dead but changed. She didn't remember how she got out of the church, didn't remember walking through the trees, but she remembered the voice, the feeling, the recognition. She reached into her coat pocket. The recorder was gone, but something else was there, a carving small, wooden, smooth dot of a woman, cradling something, and for the first time, Maeve didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like a caretaker, a link in a chain older than words, a remembrance. And far beneath the soil, the cradle rocked gently, not in hunger, not in rage, but in rest. Some stories aren't forgotten. They wait, and when someone speaks the right word, the door creaks open. Maeve Delaney stood at the edge of the hollow, unsure if she had ever truly left. Her boots sank into the wet moss where the forest met the first paved road in miles. The old path behind her, barely more than an animal trail, wound back into the trees, disappearing into the fog. She clutched the wooden carving in her palm, feeling its strange warmth against her skin. The shape of the woman, the quiet curve of the cradle. She hadn't eaten in over a day, hadn't slept. But she wasn't afraid, not anymore. It was as if something had settled in her, or perhaps beneath her. A silence she didn't trust, but didn't want to break. Her phone was gone, her recorder, her bag, all gone. Yet somehow, she still had the carving, and the journal pages, folded in her coat pocket, were half-charred, handwritten fragments. Names, symbols, ritual phrases, written in shaking cursive. The kind of thing an old woman might scribble in secret, just before the forgetting took hold. The kind of thing someone like Maeve was never supposed to find. 4 days later, Maeve was back in Charleston, at least, physically. The city looked different. Sharper, louder, distant, as if she were viewing it through 2 panes of glass. People moved in rushed patterns. Phones pinged in pockets. Coffee shops overflowed with warm conversations that sounded like static to her. Maeve watched from a bench outside the library, the same place where she'd first researched Black Hollow's founding. Now she knew. The town didn't begin in 1853. That was only the date someone had chosen to start counting. The real beginning lay deeper beneath foundation stones, behind false graves, inside whispered names scratched into wood, and every documented record she'd once trusted. Lies, or worse, silences. She tried, for a time, to go back to normal, filed a police report for her stolen belongings, spoke to a ranger about being lost in the woods for a few days, avoided questions about the old town, the church, the burned floorboards. But it didn't stick, because Black Hollow wasn't finished with her, and she wasn't finished with it. On the 5th night back, she dreamed of a bell. It rang at exactly 3:33 a.m. Once, twice, 33 times, each tone sharper than the last dot. When she woke, her nose was bleeding, her sheet smelled like soil, and in her apartment's kitchen, the wooden carving had moved, no longer beside the lamp, now cradled in a bowl of salt. She hadn't put it there. Maeve did the only thing she could. She started investigating again, but not in the library, stacks, or newspaper archives. She started with people, old women, survivors, obituaries. She followed faint traces left in county records, women with no known spouses, deaths registered without next of kin. 33 names, nearly impossible to trace, but one stood out: Mildred Kavanaugh, deceased. 1974. No relatives listed. Lived in a long-abandoned care facility outside Monk's Corner. Her records were sealed, her grave unmarked. And yet, Maeve found an image buried deep in a forgotten case file, a photograph of a much younger Mildred, seated in a rocking chair, holding a small wooden figure, the same carving Maeve now kept by her bed. Underneath the photo, a scribbled note from a nurse, still mutters about the cradle, refuses to sleep, asks about the 33rd. Maeve's hands trembled. She read it again, asks about the 33rd. In the days that followed, odd things began happening. She started receiving anonymous emails, all blank, except the subject line, "You are not the first." Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside, a torn page, From a 1958 field diary. University of South Carolina Anthropological Department. Locals insist the church was built atop something older, possibly indigenous, possibly not. No excavation permitted. Women were hostile, spoke of the sleeping mouth and the bone bell. Superstition likely, but unnerving. Returning next month for follow-up. Maeve looked up the name at the bottom of the page. Dr. C. Ernest Harlow. She searched databases, alumni records, archives. No such professor, no such expedition. It was as if he'd been erased. And then one night, the cradle began to hum. Not in the dream. In her apartment. The actual wooden carving it vibrated softly, like a tuning fork struck against bone. Maeve didn't move. She just watched as a thin line of soil leaked from its base and spread across her table in delicate cracks. Then came the whisper, not in her ears, in her mind. If you forget me, I become you. Maeve covered the carving with a towel, locked it in the freezer. But she could still hear the hum through the walls. The next day, she received a message, typed, on a typewriter, hand-delivered. No name, only an address. 109 Chapel Cross, Black Hollow. No return road, no GPS, just the words. If you come, you finish the circle. She stared at it for hours, then she packed a bag. Maeve didn't tell anyone. She was going. She left her apartment key in the mailbox, deleted her social accounts, wiped her laptop. The world, she realized, would go on forgetting, just like it always had. But someone had to remember, and if she was truly the 33rd, if that cradle had chosen her, then maybe the hollow hadn't devoured her. Maybe it had been waiting by. Dusk. She was deep into the woods again. No trail markers, no compass, only the sound of the trees and the whisper beneath. The moss died the time she reached the burnt remains of the church. The moon had risen. The basement door was open. Someone had been there recently. Candles lit, a path cleared. She stepped inside at the center of the chapel floor. Something new had appeared, a second cradle, this one made of bone, and it was rocking, back and forth, back and forth. No hands touched it, but a voice rose from its hollow center, young and old, layered, female and not, widow of the circle. Do you come to bind or to break? Maeve swallowed hard. Her eyes stung. The wood carving pulsed in her coat, and somewhere deep in her chest, a memory rose, not hers, but borrowed. Of soil, of silence, of a lullaby that never ends. She stepped closer to the cradle and whispered the ancient vow. With sorrow, I feed. With silence, I bind. Some places don't hide their truth. They just wait for you to kneel low enough to hear it. Maeve Delaney stood over the cradle made of bone. It rocked gently in front of her, not with the weight of a child, but something else. Something older, something that had never been born, but had always waited to be held. Her whispered vow still echoed in the stone beneath her feet. With sorrow, I feed. With silence, I bind. And the moment she spoke it, the shadows shifted. A draft swept through the scorched chapel, rustling the candle flames. The air changed, not colder, but deeper, as if she had stepped into a breath being held far beneath the earth. And the cradle stopped moving. Dead still. Maeve didn't move. She didn't dare blink. Then it spoke. The voice came not from the cradle itself, but from the walls around it, from the bones of the floor, from the stain of something weeping just behind her heartbeat. She remembers. She speaks. She begins. The voice was many. Maeve took a cautious step forward. The cradle gave off no heat, no scent. Yet the space around it felt charged, like the air before a storm. She reached into her coat, pulling out the carved wooden figure she'd carried from the first chapel ruins. At once, the bone cradle vibrated a dull, hollow sound, like teeth, chattering in a deep cavern. A crack split along its side, and then a finger emerged, thin, pale, child-sized, but the skin wrinkled as though it had aged before forming. Maeve staggered backward. The thing in the cradle moved again, not crawling out, but pushing in, as though it were returning to the bone, rather than rising from it. Then came the sound, a lullaby, soft, feminine, sung from nowhere, yet so familiar, Maeve nearly wept. She remembered it. Not from her childhood, from her dreams, from the voices that had whispered in the forest when she was still a child, playing in the backyard, alone and digging. That song, that same song. 3 went down and 2 returned. One was fire, one was spurned, but one still rocks, unseen, unheard. She clutched the wooden figure to her chest, and the walls began to peel. It wasn't literal, not at first. The candlelight flickered, refracting against layers in the stone. Images emerged, murals, hidden beneath soot and decay. Faces painted in red and black. Circles of women, some kneeling, others blindfolded. One with her mouth sewn shut. Maeve saw herself in all of them, not metaphorically, not spiritually. She saw her own face repeated again and again in the mural, each time a little older, a little more worn. The final image showed a woman cradling a shattered cradle made of stone, her eyes hollowed, her mouth open in a silent scream. Beneath the image, scrawled in the same faded ink as the journal fragments she'd found, "She who hears the 33rd name shall not return the same." Maeve turned from the mural, breathing hard. The cradle was now still. The finger had vanished, but something else had appeared inside it, a folded paper, no larger than a matchbook. She picked it up carefully. It smelled like cedar. Unfolding it revealed only 3 words. "Remember her voice." Maeve stared at the page, confused. Whose voice? The lullaby had stopped. The candles flickered violently, and just as she turned to leave, a terrible groaning echoed from beneath the stone, a low moan of shifting earth, as if something vast were stirring far below. Then, a scream, high, shrill, coming from outside the chapel. Maeve didn't think. She ran. The woods were alive. Not with animals, not with wind, with breathing, heavy, rhythmic, like lungs stitched into the trees. She ducked beneath a twisted elm and paused behind the thick trunk, heart pounding. The scream had come from the direction of the old graveyard. She was sure of it. She moved again, faster now, the dirt trail, almost invisible beneath the thick mist curling through the branches. Then, through the fog, she saw it. A woman barefoot, running, her dress torn, hair wild, skin soaked in mud. Maeve stepped into the clearing and called out. The woman froze, turned, and Maeve's blood turned to ice. It was her grandmother, Evelyn Delaney, dead since 1997. Evelyn stared at Maeve, as if she'd seen a ghost. Her mouth opened, no sound. Then, suddenly, she turned and ran again, disappearing into the trees. Maeve chased her. Branches whipped against her arms. Stones cut her palms as she stumbled and kept running, heart hammering harder than it ever had. She chased the woman's fading shape through twisted trees, past forgotten graves, until at last the trail opened into a clearing she recognized. The ruined foundation of an old home, her grandmother's house, or what was left of it. The house had burned. Decades ago, Maeve remembered the story, the fire that claimed it when Evelyn was a child. Her family lost, the records buried. But now, here it was, rebuilt in shadow, flickering at the edges, like a half-remembered dream. And in the window stood Evelyn again, young, face pale, eyes wide with terror. Behind her, something moved, a shape, taller than any man, cloaked in smoke. The window shattered. Evelyn screamed, and the house imploded in silence. Maeve awoke hours later, face down in the wet moss. The sky above her was empty. The air, cold. But the ground, it was warm, and beneath her body, embedded in the dirt, was another paper, same size, same cedar scent. For new words, The house never burned. Maeve sat up, gasping. Her face was scratched, her hands stained, and her backpack, the one she'd left behind days ago, was resting by her side, untouched. She unzipped it. Inside, her recorder, her journal, her phone, all undamaged. But something new as well. A third cradle. This one carved of stone and wood, layered together like a coffin, and etched on its side a name she'd never seen before but knew immediately. Amara Delaney, whispered the name aloud. The cradle creaked, and from somewhere in the trees, a woman's voice responded, I remember. The lullaby returned, soft, ancient, and this time Maeve didn't run. She stood, she listened, and she sang with it. Not every grave needs a body. Some just need to be remembered. The lullaby faded. Maeve stood in the clearing long after the final note dissolved into the trees. The stone and wood cradle in her hands had grown cold, heavier, as though it had fed on her breath. Her memories. She ran her fingers over the name, carved into its base. Amara Delaney. No record of that name existed in the family archives. Maeve had spent years searching birth ledgers, death notices, school rolls, church registries, and yet the cradle knew her. Her thumb paused at a notch in the stone, a mark too intentional to be age, almost a sigil. She pulled out her notebook and began sketching. The shape before it faded. It looked like a twisted eye with 3 lashes, and at its center, a flame. As she sketched, a breeze stirred behind her, carrying a scent she hadn't known in years. Clove, water and tallow soap. Her grandmother's scent. Maeve turned. The woods were still. No figures moved through the fog, but in the distance, just beyond the tree line, a warm glow emerged. Flickering amber. Lantern light. Lantern light. She moved cautiously toward it, boots crunching over roots and dead leaves. The lantern appeared suspended in air, until, at last, the silhouette of a stone archway revealed itself, an old gate, overgrown and half swallowed by vines. But not just any gate. It was the cemetery, not the public one, the Delaney family plot, long sealed, long buried in scandal and silence. The church had officially closed it in 1907. Yet the gate stood wide open. The lantern swung lazily in the wind, and beyond it, fresh footprints in the dirt. Maeve entered. She walked slowly, the air colder inside the gate. The silence was absolute. Even the crickets had vanished. Each headstone she passed bore a familiar surname. Delaney, Crawford, Thorne, and again, Delaney. Some names matched her family tree, others didn't. She paused at one particularly worn stone, its face eroded, but still legible beneath the moss. Here lies Amara, first of the 3. We did not bury her, she buried us. Maeve touched the top of the stone, eyes wide. First. She pulled her flashlight and scanned the rows. Newer markers stood behind the older ones, small, uniform, unadorned, at least 33 in total. All lined in neat curves like ribs, forming the skeleton of a forgotten church. Each stone bore no name, only a number, and at the very center of the circle, a shallow well. Maeve approached the well with careful steps. Its edge was worn stone, engraved with small looping text that circled the rim. She knelt and read aloud. We wept for the first, we sang for the last. Their names we carry, but we never ask. The cradle in her pack shifted, vibrating faintly, like it was humming. Maeve removed it, holding it over the well. A whisper escaped, the mouth of the pit, not words, but the sound of teeth clacking in the dark. The lullaby returned again, twisted this time, slowed down, minor in tone, like a child singing in reverse. Maeve took a breath and lowered the cradle in. Nothing happened at first. Then, a pulse. Not felt in her hands, but in her chest. Like something deep in the earth had recognized her. A vision struck her like lightning. Not memory, not dream, but witnessing. She saw a dark birthing room, flickering lamplight, and 13 women kneeling in a circle, their mouths stitched shut, eyes open wide in silent horror. A child born without sound, not crying, just staring, unblinking as if it remembered every past life and bore judgment on all of them. A preacher, cloaked in ash, holding the infant to a mirror and watching the mirror shatter into blood. Maeve gasped and dropped the cradle. It landed at the edge of the well, splitting open along its wooden seam. Inside, a bundle of blackened fabric. She peeled it open, a swaddled rib. Too long for an infant, burned at the tip, still slick with oil. Tucked beneath it, a page torn from a hymn book, scrawled by hand across the notes. The 33 are not widows, they are wives. They married the silence. Maeve fell back onto the dirt, heart pounding, her vision blurred. The well gurgled, not with water, but breathing, as though the pit had lungs and now recognized its own blood above it. She tried to rise, but her limbs trembled, and then, a voice. Direct, feminine, familiar. You're not the first to dig. Maeve turned sharply. A woman stood just beyond the row of numbered graves. She wore a long coat, her hair tied back, skin pale as frost. In her hand, a file folder stained with age. Maeve blinked. It was the historian from the county office, Dr. Eliza Moreau. But she looked different, older, sharper, like time had stopped being gentle with her. Maeve opened her mouth, but Eliza raised a hand. I know what you've seen, and I know you think you're close. But this isn't history. This is inheritance. Maeve struggled to her feet. You knew about this. Eliza didn't answer right away. Instead, she approached and gently picked up the broken cradle. Amara wasn't just the first. She was the bride. Maeve frowned. Bride too, who? Eliza looked up, her expression unreadable. Not to who, to what? She handed Maeve the folder. Inside were copies of unreleased court transcripts from the 1899 Black Hollow trials, the ones long believed to be destroyed. They detailed a sect that had operated in the town under the guise of a grief support chapel. The transcripts described rituals involving stillborn children, widow brides married in midnight ceremonies to the mouth beneath the hollow, a preacher known only as Father Thresh. Maeve's eyes widened. That name had been whispered in her dreams in the song. Thresh. Elisa continued. The chapel wasn't burned by accident. The town did it, but not to destroy the sect, to contain it. Maeve looked up. Then why are there still signs? Eliza knelt at the well's edge. Because the town lied. The fire didn't end the rites. It just hid them, repackaged them as mourning, grief, guilt. Every generation, another woman breaks, another cradle returns, another vow is made. She looked directly at Maeve. You think you came here to find answers. You came here to take your place. Maeve's knees buckled. She wanted to scream, to argue, to deny, but deep down, she knew. She had felt it her entire life, in dreams, in whispers, in the ache in her chest during every funeral, every tragedy that passed too quietly. This wasn't just her family's story, it was her role, and the cradle had chosen her. But for what? Eliza stood again. You don't have to finish it. You can walk away. Maeve looked back at the shattered cradle, at the black rib. At the numberless graves. She clenched her fists. If I walk away, someone else will be called. Eliza nodded solemnly. Yes. Maeve took a breath. Then I'll finish it. The wind shifted, the well moaned, and the lantern by the gate blew out. Some towns have cemeteries. Black Hollow is one. The lantern had gone out, but the well still breathed. Maeve stood at its edge, the broken cradle cradled in her arms like a hollow heart. Eliza was gone, disappeared into the fog without so much as a snapped twig. Whether she'd been real, or just another echo of the town's long-suppressed memory, Maeve couldn't tell. What she knew and felt deep in her marrow was that Black Hollow was waking up. No, it had never slept. She turned back toward the cemetery gate. The air was tighter now, colder, almost viscous. Every breath in tasted of burnt sugar and wet earth. The cradle, or what remained of it, vibrated once more in her arms. Then, from the well, a distant sound, not a moan, not a voice, knocking from below. She didn't run. Maeve followed the sound of her own heartbeat as she made her way back through the woods, clutching the shattered cradle to her chest. She knew now she was being watched, but not from behind trees or shadows. From beneath every root she stepped over, every mound of moss or twisted trunk. It felt as though the forest was growing on top of something that shifted, twitched, remembered as she reached the old chapel ruins again. Something pulled her eyes upward, high in the remains of the steeple, among the torn rafters. A single veil fluttered from a nail, lace, yellowed with time. It drifted lazily in the wind, like a ghost's flag. She didn't touch it. Back in her grandmother's house, Maeve lit every oil lamp and candle she could find. The electricity had gone out sometime in the night. Not surprising. The Delaney home always knew when one of its own got too close to the truth. She laid out the cradle pieces on the table, alongside the scorched rib and the strange hymn note. She unfolded Eliza's file and began poring over each document again. But this time, she wasn't looking for facts. She was looking for ritual, and she found it in one of the oldest transcripts, recorded during the 1899 trial of preacher Nathaniel Thresh. A witness named Helen Crawley had testified to a ceremony held once every 7 years at the mouth. She described a cradle made of charred ash wood and river stone, a single rib taken from the body of a willing bride, a veil placed upon the altar of what she called the first hall. There was no location given for the mouth, but another document, a map drawn crudely by one of the original Delaney sons, depicted the original foundation of Black Hollow. Beneath it, scrawled in childlike handwriting, "They built the town over the wrong hole." Maeve blinked. She remembered now, when she was 8, she'd found a locked root cellar behind the house. Her grandmother had whipped her for trying to open it. "You touch that place," Gran had said, voice shaking, "and the town touches back." Maeve hadn't gone near it since, but now, she understood. The first hall wasn't a church. It was below, and it was still there. At dawn, she found the rusted key buried in a mason jar beneath the hearthstones, right where Gran used to hide things she couldn't burn. The cellar door groaned as it opened. Dust spiraled upward, then sank like defeated breath. A narrow staircase led down, cut from stone and packed earth, slick with age and condensation. Maeve descended slowly, each step accompanied by that same distant knocking from below. The air was thick, ancient. The deeper she went, the more her vision blurred, not from light, but from something older than darkness. By the time her boots touched the stone floor, she was no longer alone. The chamber was circular, built entirely of old stone, volcanic, slick, and veined with black glass. Pillars rose from the corners, twisted and uneven, like they'd been grown rather than carved. At the center, an altar, not Christian, not anything she recognized, but it was built to receive, and it waited. Maeve stepped forward and placed the cradle, or what remained of it, upon the altar. She added the rib, the hymn note, and then, hesitating, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her grandmother's locket. Inside, a faded photo of a woman she now knew was Amara. She opened the locket, set it on top, and whispered, "I know your name now, and I carry it forward." The room responded. The pillars exhaled dust. The air tightened. The altar cracked down the center, revealing a hollow within, not empty, but hungry. Maeve leaned in, expecting fire, or rot, or void. Instead, she saw something impossible, a reflection of herself, but not now, not present. She saw herself, as a child, standing in the Delaney parlor beside her grandmother. Then again, older, attending the funeral of her father, the coffin sealed, the body never recovered. Then, she saw a version of herself she did not recognize, wearing a black veil, holding a candle, speaking in a voice that was not her own. If you name the widows, they become wives again, and the town will take what is owed. Maeve stumbled back. The reflection disappeared. In its place, a voice emerged, not a whisper, not an echo. A choir of breathless lungs. We remember her name. Say the rest. The walls pulsed from the cracks in the stone. A dark ichor began to drip, blood-like, but thick, almost thoughtful. Maeve fell to her knees, trying to remember every document, every gravestone, every whispered name. She spoke aloud. Amar and Catherine, Ilan, Judith, Agnes, Elia, Rose, Clara, Miriam. Each name summoned a gust of wind, no source. Each name carved itself into the walls in burning script. She got to 12, but couldn't remember the 13th. The room fell silent again, and from the shadows beyond the altar, a figure emerged. She wore a bridal dress soaked in dirt and rain. Her mouth was stitched shut with black thread in her hands. A book made of leathered skin. Maeve stood frozen. The figure stepped forward, raising the book, and opened it to a blank page. She dipped her finger into the dripping ichor from the wall, and held it out to Maeve. Right. The final name. Maeve's hand trembled. And then, she understood. The final widow was not forgotten. She had simply not yet died. Maeve Delaney. She dipped her finger in the ink, and wrote her own name. The altar roared. A flood of heat, wind, and memory surged through the chamber. Maeve was hurled backward, not bodily, but inwardly, through visions of every woman who had stood here. Before her, she saw them weeping, fighting, accepting, singing. Each of them had offered something to the mouth beneath. Black hollow, not sacrifice, not surrender, but remembrance. And now Maeve had joined them. When she awoke, she was lying on the cellar floor. The cradle was gone, so was the rib, but carved into the altars. Surface were 33 names, and at the bottom, Maeve, who ended the song. She stood, breath shaking. The house above her creaked, not in warning, but in relief, and in the trees beyond. The birds began to sing again, for the first time in decades. But even in that moment, as she climbed the stairs toward the sun, Maeve knew, some songs don't end. They just get buried deeper. They called it justice. The town called it balance. But the women called it by name. Final entry. Maeve Delaney's field journal, never published. Maeve emerged from the cellar at first light, blinking into the gray hush of morning. It wasn't the sunrise she expected. There were no golden streaks or warming rays through the clouds. Just a flat, heavy light, like the sun itself was still deciding if it wanted to rise over Black Hollow again. But the air was different. It no longer pressed down on her like guilt. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was simply quiet, and, for the first time in over 100 years, the house did not creak. It breathed. Down in the center of town, the fog had lifted. The road to the cemetery no longer curved. It went straight. The steeple of the old chapel, long thought destroyed in a lightning strike in 1912, stood again, not fully rebuilt, but present, as if remembered into form, and the veil that had once fluttered from its beam. Only a nail remained, rusted and bare. Maeve walked the empty streets alone. Her boots clicked on cobblestone. Her eyes scanned every closed window, every porch, every broken shutter. She could feel it in the silence the town had witnessed, and now it waited at the base of the hill, beneath the twisted oak that once marked the path to the hollow mouth. Maeve stopped. There was no altar now, no cradle, no rib. Just the ground, soft and moss-covered, and something beneath it settled. She knelt and placed her palm flat against the earth. It was warm, she whispered. Not a prayer, not a farewell, just a fact. I remembered you. And in that moment, the wind picked up, not bitter, but cool, gentle, carrying with it the faintest sound of singing, wordless, feminine, distant. In the following weeks, Maeve stayed, not because she had to, because she was drawn to remain. She cleaned her grandmother's house, tore down the blackout curtains, opened the windows, replaced every cracked mirror. The townsfolk, though few, began to emerge again, slowly, suspiciously, as if afraid the curse might notice, but they could feel it too. The weight had shifted. Whispers turned to conversation. The post office reopened. Mailboxes were painted. Again, candles replaced bare bulbs. People stopped locking their doors, not out of ignorance, but out of defiance. They were done hiding from their own soil. Maeve turned the house into a kind of repository, not a museum, not a library, but something quieter, a place for stories. She started with her grandmother's journals, then the town records, the church's hidden archives. Every name she'd spoken in the cellar became a chapter, every widow's forgotten history. A story on paper. People began leaving their own memories at her doorstep. Old letters, unopened telegrams. Wedding rings. One morning, someone slipped an unmarked cassette tape under her door. Maeve played it. The tape was scratchy, low quality, but the voice, Eliza, if you're hearing this, Maeve, then maybe I didn't vanish. Maybe I just moved on. The hollow doesn't kill, it absorbs. We thought it wanted death, but it wanted witnesses. That's what the widows were. Brides of memory. Keep remembering. Don't let the song go silent again. Maeve didn't cry. She smiled. She placed the tape beside the others on her shelf. Above it, on a wooden plaque, she carved a phrase, not hers, not even Eliza's. Something from the hymn note. The mouth does not devour what it hears named. In spring, the town council convened publicly, for the first time in decades. There were only 6 members left. Maeve stood before them and made a request. Not for money, not for ceremony, for a graveyard expansion. They asked why. She told them. There were 33 unmarked spaces, needing headstones. They approved the motion unanimously. And on a windless April morning, the people of Black Hollow, those who had stayed, those who had returned, and even those who had sworn never to speak of the town again, gathered in silence on the hill. Maeve stood before the crowd and read each name, not loud, just clearly. She placed a flower on each new marker, one for each woman, no last names, just their true names. At the 33rd stone, she paused and placed her own flower. This is not a grave, she said. This is a promise. No one clapped. No one spoke. But the breeze that stirred the branches was soft, like a sigh. Later that night, Maeve sat on the porch with a lantern and a recorder. She looked into the lens and spoke to whoever might still be listening. If you're here, you felt it too. That strange unease around forgotten places. That town you drive through but never stop in. The house that never sold. The name that disappears from family trees. Some stories don't want to be uncovered, but some just want to be remembered. Black Hollow wasn't cursed. It was ignored, and that ignorance grew teeth. The 33 widows, they weren't haunting us. They were waiting for us to hear them, to name them, to end the hunger. Maeve paused, then leaned closer. You think your town doesn't have a hollow? Look again. She clicked off the recorder and sat there in silence as night fell, the lantern flickering against her face, the graveyard watching peacefully from the hill. Epilog. They say the town is quiet now, peaceful, even. The birds returned. The well was filled with stone. The woods are green again. Children laugh. Church bells ring. But sometimes, if you pass through Black Hollow at dusk, if you stop at the foot of the hill and listen very, very carefully, you might hear it just beneath the wind, a soft hum, a woman's voice, singing how many towns eat their dead, how many pretend they don't, and how many more wait, hungry, until someone is brave. Inato say the names out loud.